Hi, Assalamualaikum. Today, me and my group mate going to talk about global impact of Trump era tariff on Western Europe. The Trump administration introduced tariffs during 2018 and 2019 that affected many countries, including Western Europe nations like United Kingdom, France, and Germany. While China was the target, the United States did place tariffs on some European goods, primarily steels and others. And right now, I will be presenting an overview of the Trump-era tariff policy and its impact on Western Europe. Let's begin with the background and scope of the policy. In March 2018, the Trump administration imposed tariffs on two major materials, which is 25% on steels and 10% on aluminium. These tariffs were global, which means they also apply to Western Europe countries like Germany, the United Kingdom, and France. For examples, Germany, known as one of the largest steel producers in the world, faced direct consequence. Its steel's import to the United States became more expensive. The United Kingdom and France, who export large quantities of aluminium, were also affected. These metals are crucial in several industries, especially automobile manufacturing, construction, and heavy equipment. As a result, the tariff disrupted important sectors on both sides of the Atlantic. Next, let's look at the automotive industry. In 2018, the Trump administration considered adding tariffs on European cars and car parts, especially targeting German brands such as Volkswagen, BMW, and Mercedes-Benz. This move was linked to a national security investigation. Although this auto tariff will never fully impose, the ongoing trade creates a great deal of uncertainty in Europe's auto industry. Companies delayed investment decisions and became hesitant about future trade with the United States. To understand the timeline, in 2018, the tariff on steel and aluminium began. Temporary exemptions were granted in May 2018, including to the European Union. However, by June, most exemptions were withdrawn after negotiation failed. Throughout 2019, although there were discussions of auto tariff, they were delayed and never officially implemented. Now, let's move on to the impacts this tariff had on Western Europe. In 2017, Germany exported about $5 billion worth of steel and aluminium to the United States. After the tariff, their products become more expensive and less competitive. The United Kingdom and France also saw a decline in exports, which affected their industrial sectors. Meanwhile, European car manufacturers had to deal with rising costs and investment delays in the United States due to the fear of future auto tariffs. Now, why did the United States government implement this tariff? There are four main reasons. Number one, national security. The United States argued that domestic steel and aluminium production is essential for military and infrastructure needs. Relying too much on foreign sources, especially during times of war, was considered risky. Number two, reducing the trade deficit. In 2017, the United States had a $140 billion trade deficit with the European Union. The goal of the tariff was to reduce imports and encourage Americans to buy more domestically produced goods. Number three, trade negotiation leverage. The tariffs were also used as a tool to pressure Europe into a better trade deals, like opening European markets to more American goods and reducing tariff on United States exports. And number four, fair competition. Lastly, the United States believed that some European goods were being sold too cheaply, possibly because of government subsidies or lower production costs. The tariffs aim to protect American manufacturers and ensure fair competition. In conclusion, the Trump-era tariff caused significant tension between the United States and Europe, affecting industries, trade relations, and economic strategies. While the aim was to protect United States interests, the impact on allies, especially in Western Europe, was considerable. Thank you.
Okay, now I will be presenting about the economic impact of the US and EU tariff conflicts, especially how it affected major industry, trade flows, and global supply chains. Let's begin with how EU industry exporting to the US were affected. The most vulnerable sector include luxury goods, pharmaceuticals, cars, alcohol, and machinery. Countries like Germany, Italy, and France were hit the hardest. For example, BMW, Volkswagen, and Mercedes faced higher production costs, disrupted supply chains, and declining US demand, which put jobs and factories at a risk. The pharmaceutical sector has not been hit yet, but many are worried about future tariffs. Since March, steel and aluminium exports have been subject to a 25%, raising costs and lowering demand. Now, focusing on France, even though only 8% of French export go to the US, key sectors are still vulnerable. Take aeronautics, it makes up about 20% of France's €9 billion export to the US. Airbus is safer since it has a factory in the US, but Dassault Aviation is more exposed. The French wine industry is on edge. They are facing possible tariff of up to 200% that could reduce export by as much as €800 million. And for luxury brands, LVMH is affected, while Hermes plans to increase prices to cover the extra costs. That's why President Macron has suggested a sector-by-sector EU strategy to defend European industry. Let's flip the perspective. How did the US get hit? In retaliation, the EU imposed tariff on $23.6 billion worth of US goods, including $11.9 billion in aircraft, $11.6 billion in vehicle parts, $2.3 billion in vehicle, and $1.5 billion in alcohol like wine and spirits. This made US goods more expensive and less competitive, leading to lower sales, higher business costs, and slower growth. The EU has also taken the case to the World Trade Organization, and talks between both sides have stalled, adding more pressure on US exporters. Now, I will explain change in trade volume. Before the conflict, the average US tariff on EU goods was only 1.35%, but after full implementation, it could jump to 15.2%. That includes 9.7% from retaliation tariff, 1.4% on steel and aluminium, and 2.6% on vehicles. Some products like pharmaceuticals and electronic, for example smartphone, were exempted, which helped slightly. In trade balance shift in 2024, the EU had a trade surplus of €215.5 billion with the US. This imbalance is exactly what Trump called unfair when justifying the tariff. Among the most affected, Germany exported €161 billion worth of goods to the US, and Ireland, almost 30% of its total export goes straight to the US. In supply chain adjustment, finally we have seen major shift in supply chain. Trump reshoring policy pushed many companies to rethink their operation. Now, EU firms are considering moving production to the US or Mexico to avoid the tariff. Big names like Siemens and Airbus are exploring US expansion, and Mexico has become a popular choice too, thanks to the USMCA agreement, which gives stable access to the US market. So, to conclude, this trade conflict has had massive ripple effect, not just on numbers and export, but also on job, factories, and global strategies. It is a reminder of how interconnected our economies really are, and why trade decisions made in one country can impact industries across the world. Thank you.
So today I'll be presenting about how the European Union responded to the US tariff during the Trump administration in 2018. This situation became one of the biggest trade tensions between close allies in recent years, and it had both economic and political consequences. What actually happened? In early 2018, the Trump administration imposed high tariffs on imported steel and aluminium, 25% on steel and 10% on aluminium. The US justified this by saying it was for national security reasons, but this tariff didn't just affect enemy countries, it also affected longtime allies, including the European Union. Naturally, this shocked and upset European leaders, who saw the move as unfair and unnecessary. It created serious tension between the US and the European Union, who were supposed to be close trade partners. So on the second slide, it is fighting back with tariffs. The European Union responded quickly and firmly. They introduced retaliatory tariffs on 2.8 billion worth of US goods, but they didn't choose random products. They were very strategic. The European Union targeted at items like Harley-Davidson, motorcycles, bourbon whiskey, Levi's jeans, peanut butter and orange juice, and even more steel and aluminium. Why these items? Because many of them came from US states that were politically important, especially in elections. This was a clever way for the European Union to put political pressure on Trump by encouraging domestic backlash within the US. Next, legal and diplomatic actions. The European Union didn't just respond with tariffs, they also took action through the World Trade Organization, WTO. In June 2018, the European Union filed a formal complaint saying US tariffs were not really about security, but just an excuse to protect American industries, which goes against global trade rules. At the same time, there were diplomatic efforts to reduce the tension. A very important meeting took place in July 2018 between European Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker and President Trump. This meeting resulted in a temporary pause in the conflict, and both sides agreed to work toward fairer trade agreements. But still, not all issues were resolved and some tensions continued. Moving to the next point, a shift in European Union strategy. This conflict became a turning point for the European Union. Traditionally, Europe had depended on the US to lead the global trade system, but now they saw the need to become more independent and protect themselves from future economic pressure. The European Union began strengthening its.
After that, impact on United States. For a consumer, Trump's tariff on Western Europe led to price hike for many everyday goods in the US, especially cars, wine, and cheese. Since a lot of these items are specialty products, American consumers didn't have easy alternative. This meant people paid more and had fewer choices on store shelves. The impact was felt most by middle-income households who regularly buy European goods. After that, for producers, some US producers actually gained from the tariff. For example, local wine and cheese makers faced less competition from European imports. But on the flip side, manufacturers that rely on European parts, like in the auto and aerospace industries, had to deal with higher input costs and delayed shipments. This disruption hurt production efficiency and overall profits. Plus, US farmers were hit hard by Europe's retaliatory tariffs on products like bourbon and motorcycles. Impact on the employment. The impact on employment was mixed. Protected sectors like steel and food production managed to keep jobs stable, but in industries that rely heavily on exports or European parts, hiring slowed down. Some companies had overtime on cancelled expansion plans, while the national unemployment rate looked stable. Specific states, especially those tied to agriculture, face more serious job insecurity. Lastly, impact on the inflation. Tariff pushed up the price of many goods imported from Europe, which contribute to a modest rise in inflation in the US. Items like cars, cheese, and machinery become more expensive. Thankfully, this inflation was kept under control by other factors like low oil prices. But economists warn that if the trade war dragged on, long-term inflation could become a bigger problem for both consumers and business.
First, for supply chain realignment, Western European industries like automotive and aerospace face higher costs due to US tariff. In response, they reduced reliance on US suppliers, sourcing more from the European Union and Asia to improve supply chain resilience and reduce risk. Second, for regional trade agreements, the European Union strengthened trade ties with Japan, Mercosur, Asia, and Canada. This reduced dependency on the US and supported the European Union goal of strategic autonomy, making trade both an economic and geopolitical tool. Lastly, for shift in geopolitical alliance, Trump's tariff strained US and European Union relations. In response, the European Union began building closer ties with other global powers like China and India, showing a shift toward a multipolar world where Europe takes a more independent global role.
And lastly, for the conclusion, Trump-era tariffs aim to protect US industry but cause global disruption. First, Western Europe faced higher costs, export losses, and responded with counter tariff. Second, US consumer and industry saw price hike and supply chain issue. Third, the EU pursued new trade deals, reducing reliance on US markets, resulted in strained alliance and a shift toward a more fragmented and multipolar trade system. That's all from our group. Thank you.